It's the most dangerous gang war in Scotland's criminal history. A war that has lasted over 20 years and left dozens dead, not just in Glasgow, but in Spain, Amsterdam, and even the Middle East. All because violence followed these two gangs wherever they ran. More than 300 organized crime groups have come and gone, but only two have fought with this level of obsession and hatred: the Daniels and the Lyons. These two crime families operate from neighborhoods just 4 miles apart, but their feud has stretched across Scotland, into Spain, Dubai, and even beyond, and it all began as a local turf war. But long before Scotland's underworld split in two, there were just two men, Jamie Daniel and Eddie Lyons Sr., both hungry, both dangerous, and both were building criminal empires just 4 miles apart in the heart of Glasgow. The Daniel crime clan was led by Jamie Daniel. He grew up in Postle Park, one of the city's roughest neighborhoods, and he was born during a time when shipyards were collapsing and heroin was creeping into every corner of working class life. Jamie was one of 10 children. He was raised by a widowed mother after his father died when he was just 10 years old. It was the streets that taught him how to survive. By his teens, Jamie was stealing scrap metal and breaking into warehouses. But what hardened him most was the arrest of his older brother, Billy, during a copper theft. That one event planted a deep, lifelong hatred for the police. Jamie would spend the next 3 decades avoiding them, mocking them, and outsmarting them. While others in the neighborhood were shooting heroin, Jamie decided to import it instead. In the 1980s, as the heroin epidemic exploded in Glasgow, Jamie made powerful connections through a Pakistani family tied to overseas drug routes. He started moving bulk shipments of high-purity heroin by partnering with dealers from Manchester to Liverpool. By the 90s, Jamie Daniel was operating a £10 million drug empire from a scrapyard and an office, which he disguised as a car dealership. He wore overalls, drove battered vans, and kept his face out of the newspapers. But his power was absolute. Just a few miles north, Eddie Lyons Sr. was building his own network in Milton. Unlike Jamie, Eddie played it clean, at least in public. He sold bootleg videos, charmed local officials, and somehow convinced Glasgow City Council to hand over a disused school building. Even more shocking is that he secured over £1 million in public funds to turn it into a community center. In reality, it became the Lyons clan's private fortress. To the public, Eddie was a charming community man, but in private, he was training up his sons, Stephen and Eddie Jr., to run drugs, launder money, and grow their influence quietly under the radar. Two families, two empires, just a few miles apart, and the city wasn't big enough for both of them. The question now wasn't if they would clash, it was when. The strangest thing about Glasgow's most notorious gang war is that it all started with a party. It was just a bunch of criminals getting together to celebrate their dirty money with loud music and enough cocaine to kill a horse. It was summer 2001, and the party was raging at a flat in Milton owned by the Daniels. The place was packed with drug dealers from across Glasgow, all of them high on their own supply. They were celebrating another successful shipment. Their safe house was stuffed with white powder and dirty cash. Everyone was having the time of their lives. What could possibly go wrong? Well, everything as it turned out. The next morning, when the hangover fog finally cleared, the Daniels realized that £20,000 worth of cocaine had vanished into thin air. Someone had walked into their own territory, their own safe house, and pulled off the most brazen heist in Glasgow's criminal history. The Daniels were absolutely stunned. This was the ultimate insult, a slap in the face. Someone had literally walked into their party, waited for everyone to get wasted, then casually strolled out with enough drugs to fund a small army. Suspicion fell on the Lyons. They were the only crew in the area with the resources, the connections, and most importantly, the sheer balls to pull off something this outrageous. The name everyone kept whispering was Stephen Lyons. He was the cocky, fast-rising son of Eddie Lyons Sr. Stephen's father ran what looked like a legitimate community center in Milton called Churnside. On paper, it was all charity work and helping local kids. In reality, it was the headquarters for the Club Boys, a crew of dealers and enforcers commanded by Stephen. They had been watching the Daniels operation, waiting for the perfect moment to strike, and that party was like their Christmas morning. To Jamie Daniel, this theft was about respect. In the underworld, an unpaid debt is a public humiliation, and Jamie Daniel had built his reputation on never ever tolerating humiliation. So he did what any self-respecting crime boss would do. He unleashed his most dangerous weapon. Kevin Gerbil Carroll was only 24 years old, but his reputation already made grown men cross the street to avoid him. The man had an ice-cold temper, zero hesitation when it came to violence, and the kind of dangerous loyalty that made him willing to die for his boss. He was Jamie Daniels' top enforcer, his personal attack dog, and to make things even more interesting, he was dating Jamie's daughter Kelly. That made this whole thing deeply, dangerously personal. In September 2001, Carroll's crew tracked Stephen Lyons to a pub in Lamb Hill, like hunters stalking prey. They waited outside in the shadows, probably chain-smoking cigarettes and checking their weapons. The plan was to get close, pull the trigger, walk away, and let the streets know what happens when you steal from the Daniels. But the thing about simple plans is that they have a nasty habit of going sideways. The shooter missed. Stephen Lyons walked out of that pub alive, probably not even realizing how close he had come to breathing his last breath. But he knew who had taken the shot, and more importantly, he understood the message. The Daniels were coming for the Lyons. A few weeks later, the Daniels decided to send a message that nobody could ignore. They attacked the Churnside Community Center, but they didn't just vandalize it. They burned the whole place down like they were cleansing it with fire. The flames ripped through offices, meeting rooms, and storage areas, causing 30,000 pounds in damage. Smoke poured into the Milton sky. Even the minibus that drove local kids around was smashed to pieces. The heart of the Lyons operation was reduced to ash and twisted metal. But if the Daniels thought the Lyons would back down after watching their headquarters burn, they clearly didn't understand who they were dealing with. The Lyons were not the type of gang to tuck their tails between their legs and apologize. They were the type to sharpen their knives and start planning something even more violent. They retaliate in January 2003. Kevin Carroll was standing outside his mother's house in Milton, probably thinking he was safe on his own turf. He was chatting on his phone, which was a big mistake. In this business, you are never safe, especially when you have been making enemies faster than most people make friends. That's when the gunman emerged from the darkness. 2 blasts from a sawn-off shotgun tore into Carroll's legs, dropping him to the pavement. Blood started pooling around him. The sound woke up half the neighborhood. Somehow, Carroll survived, but the Daniels received the message that the Lyons were ready for a fight. 11 days later, someone returned the favor with interest. Johnny Lyons, Eddie Sr.'s brother, stepped outside his house on Stornoway Street, maybe thinking the worst of the violence was behind them. The guy had no idea that the Daniels were already positioned and waiting like snipers. A bullet came flying out of the darkness aimed at his back. The only reason Johnny Lyons didn't end up in a coffin was the thick wallet in his back pocket. The bullet embedded itself in leather and cash instead of his spine, which has to be the luckiest save in criminal history. That wallet literally saved his life. But near misses were not satisfying anyone anymore. Both sides had tasted blood, and close calls just made everyone angrier. By 2006, this whole situation had evolved into something much darker and more personal. Kevin Carroll had transformed from a young enforcer into a full-blown war general for the Daniels, and he was planning something horrifying. Carroll drove out to Cumbernauld with one simple mission: to kill Eddie Lyons Jr. and end this whole nightmare once and for all. He waited while checking his weapon obsessively until Eddie appeared at his front door. Then Carroll pulled the trigger, expecting to finally close this bloody chapter. But luck was still protecting the Lyons family. Eddie was hit, blood was spilled, but he wasn't killed, which meant the war was nowhere near over. That's when Kevin Carroll crossed a line that no gangster had ever dared cross before. When he could not kill the living members of the Lyons family, he decided to go after someone who was already dead. Gary Lyons had died of leukemia at just 8 years old back in 1991. His grave was supposed to be sacred ground, a place of peace where even hardened criminals showed respect. Carroll didn't care about respect, or sacred ground, or dead children. He wanted to hurt the Lyons in a way that would cut deeper than bullets. So he allegedly tied a rope to Gary's headstone, connected it to a car, and reversed until the stone shattered into pieces across the cemetery. This was psychological warfare designed to make the Lyons feel violated in their very souls. 2 days later, as if desecrating a child's grave wasn't enough, Carroll tried to kill Eddie Jr. again in Bells Hill. But this attack went completely sideways when Eddie's car rolled over Carroll during the chaos. This injured the would-be assassin while his henchman got shot but survived. Blood smeared the street like abstract art, and still, somehow, nobody was dead. The Lyons had finally reached their breaking point. They had suffered shootings, grave desecration, and constant attacks, and they were done playing defense. It was time to teach the Daniels a lesson they would never forget. Just days later, they launched their most coordinated counterattack yet. Carroll and his close friend Ross Sherlock were walking down a quiet residential street in Bishop Briggs, probably thinking they were safe in such a peaceful neighborhood. Then the Lyons crew opened fire. Carroll took a bullet to the stomach while Sherlock got shot in both legs. Neighbors watched in horror as Carroll crawled across the pavement, bleeding and gasping for air. Both men survived the ambulance ride to the hospital, but the psychological damage was done. Carroll had been humiliated on the streets, left crawling through his own blood like a common victim. For someone with Carroll's ego and reputation, that kind of public humiliation was worse than death. The Daniels saw it as the ultimate insult. Carroll took it personally, which in Glasgow's underworld meant someone was about to pay a very heavy price. The Daniels began planning their most brutal retaliation yet, something that would make everything that came before look like a gentle warning. It was the 6th of December, 2006. Just after 2 p.m., a blue Mazda slowly pulled up outside Applerow Motors. It's a garage on Balmore Road in Lamb Hill. It was broad daylight, so no one expected what came next. Two men stepped out of the car. They were wearing trench coats and latex old man masks. In their hands were semi-automatic pistols. They stormed inside the garage and opened fire. 11 rounds were unleashed in seconds. Sparks flew as bullets hit metal, concrete, and flesh. When it was over, 2 one-year-old Michael Lyons, who was Stephen Lyons' cousin, was lying on the ground in a pool of blood. He was shot dead. He was just a mechanic, not a drug runner, not a gang enforcer. He was just in the wrong place, wearing the wrong last name. Stephen Lyons, who was the original target, had been hit too. He was shot in his leg. He screamed in pain as a bullet tore through flesh and bone. He was dragged out of the line of fire, leaving a blood trail behind. And Robert Pickett, who was a known Lyons associate, had taken a bullet to the gut. He collapsed on the floor. He would fall into a coma, lose a kidney, and wake up a month later to find out the war had just gone public. The shooters vanished as quickly as they came. The shooting showed that this was no longer a shadow war fought in alleys. It was out in the open now. No one was now safe. The police locked down nearby schools, terrified that another hit was coming. Families called in sick to work. Parents kept their kids indoors. And suddenly, every politician in the city was being questioned about this horrible incident. Raymond Anderson and James McDonald, 2 Daniel associates, were arrested soon after. The police stormed their hideout and found more than anyone expected: automatic weapons, grenades, and surveillance equipment. These were soldiers in a war. The trial was unlike anything Scotland had seen. It was held in the High Court in Glasgow, but not just any courtroom. Court number 3, the one designed for terrorists. There were armed guards everywhere, and the suspects were in constant surveillance. Every witness was protected. Every juror was on edge, because everyone knew, speak against the Daniels or the Lyons, and you might not live long enough to regret it. The judge called Michael Lyons' death a cold-blooded, premeditated assassination. The jury agreed. Anderson and McDonald were found guilty of murder, attempted murder, and illegal possession of firearms. They were given a sentence of 35 years each, which is the longest ever handed down in a Scottish gangland case at the time. Later reduced to 30, but still, it was meant to send a message. Yet if the court thought this would stop the killings, they were wrong. The attack on Applerow Motors poured gasoline on the war. Glasgow would never be the same again. Throughout 2007 to 2009, the underworld was crackling with tension like a live wire. Kevin Gerbil Carroll had become a marked man, but he behaved like no one could touch him. The guy was always one step ahead of his enemies, like he had some kind of sixth sense for danger. Multiple professional hitmen were trying to take out one man, and he kept slipping away. Carroll had already survived several serious hits by late 2009, including one near miss that should have been his last breath. But instead of laying low like any sane person would, each failed attempt only made the Gerbil bolder. The man had balls of steel, or maybe he was just completely insane. But while Carroll was showboating, the Lyons family was working in the shadows. They were patient hunters, biding their time and watching Carroll's every move. They were waiting for that perfect moment to strike back for Michael Lyons' murder and all the humiliations they had suffered since. Then came that cold January afternoon in 2010 that changed everything. It was lunchtime at an Asda supermarket in Royston. The place was packed with families doing their weekly shopping. Kids were probably whining about wanting sweets while their mums checked grocery lists. It was just another ordinary Tuesday in suburban Glasgow. Kevin Carroll sat waiting in his black Audi, likely thinking he was safe, surrounded by all those innocent shoppers doing their mundane daily business. The guy probably felt invisible among the shopping trolleys and screaming toddlers. He was dead wrong. Around 1:25 p.m., 2 masked figures in dark clothing appeared in the car park. What happened next lasted exactly 25 seconds, but those 25 seconds felt like an eternity for everyone who witnessed it. The gunmen unloaded a volley of bullets through the car windows, firing again and again with the kind of cold precision that comes from serious training. Panicked shoppers screamed and dived for cover as gunfire echoed off the concrete. Carroll didn't stand a chance. He was shot at least 5 times at point-blank range while trapped in his driver's seat. The assassins then slipped away into a getaway car and vanished before anyone could even process what they had witnessed. This hit was planned down to the last detail. The Gerbil, the Daniels' fiercest attack dog, laid slumped over his steering wheel. He was dead before he even knew what hit him. All that swagger was snuffed out in less than half a minute. This gangland assassination in front of families and children was virtually unheard of. The hit was as public as it was brutal. When detectives arrived, they found Carroll's bullet-riddled Audi, surrounded by traumatized witnesses. The whole city was on edge, with locals genuinely fearing that Carroll's murder would ignite all-out war on the streets, a new turf battle for control of North Glasgow's lucrative drug trade. Carroll's murder was the Lyons family's ultimate payback. It was nearly 4 years in the making. After the Applerow garage ambush that started this whole nightmare, the Lyons had finally eliminated the man who tortured and terrorized them. For the Daniel clan, losing the Gerbil was like losing their most effective weapon. Jamie Daniel had lost his most feared enforcer, and suddenly a cold chill ran through the rest of the family. If Kevin could be taken out in broad daylight surrounded by witnesses, it meant none of them were truly safe anymore. After this incident, detectives launched Operation Lockdown. It was an intensive campaign to smother this gang war before it could escalate into something even worse. Over the next year and a half, officers raided safe houses, stopped suspicious cars, and rounded up suspects from both sides of the feud. As a result, including several high-ranking principals of both crime families. Drugs with a street value of nearly £9 million were seized in the sweep. When you are dealing with numbers like that, you start to understand just how deep this criminal network ran through Glasgow's veins. With leaders and foot soldiers alike feeling the heat, the tit-for-tat violence that had raged for nearly a decade suddenly hit pause. Both families kept their heads down because the alternative was a one-way ticket to prison. For a brief moment, it seemed like the cycle of revenge might finally break. During these relatively quiet years, the Lyons clan stayed deep in the shadows. They were content to avoid further attention while police were swarming everywhere. Stephen Lyons actually fled Scotland altogether. He sought refuge abroad to escape both police scrutiny and any Daniel vengeance. The man had been shot twice in previous battles and survived. He was not taking any more chances. Initially, Stephen surfaced in Spain. Later, as international police cooperation tightened around him, he moved even further out of reach, settling in Dubai and forming alliances with major crime cartels in the Middle East. This retreat kept the Lyons leadership safely distant while their Glasgow operations continued on autopilot. The Daniels maintained their drug supply lines and criminal rackets during this period, but they too avoided high-profile violence. The memory of that Asda parking lot carnage and the massive police response it triggered hung over both clans like a sword of Damocles. Glasgow enjoyed a brief respite from the bloodshed, but everyone knew it was just the silence of a powder keg waiting for the right spark. Even during the quiet years, law enforcement didn't let up. Detectives methodically worked to bring past perpetrators to justice. They chipped away at the wall of silence that protected these criminals. In 2012, Lyons foot soldier Ross Monaghan stood trial. He was accused of orchestrating Carroll's murder. But then Monaghan was acquitted after witnesses mysteriously developed amnesia and evidence was proved insufficient. It was frustrating for the police, but typical of how hard it is to make charges stick when fear runs deep in people. But persistence paid off, and soon they got their breakthrough. William Billy Patterson was a suspected Lyons hitman who had fled abroad after the Asda shooting. In 2015, he was captured and extradited back to Scotland. Nearly 5 years after the parking lot ambush, Patterson was convicted of Carroll's murder and sentenced to life behind bars. It was a major victory. Then, in summer 2016, everything changed again. Jamie Daniel, the 58-year-old patriarch who had ruled his crime family for decades, lost his long battle with cancer. He died quietly in a hospital bed in July. It was an ironic end for a man who had lived by violence. Jamie Daniel became one of the rare crime kingpins to die peacefully of natural causes, but his passing would prove anything but peaceful for Glasgow. His death created a power vacuum that the Lyons were quick to exploit. After years of restrained hostility, the old feud exploded back into violence. It was as if Jamie Daniel's final breath released all the pent-up vengeance that had been building in silence. Within months of the crime boss's funeral, the Lyons clan launched a wave of retaliatory strikes to finish what they had started years earlier. In late 2016 and early 2017, tit-for-tat attacks came in rapid succession. Daylight shootings made headlines once again, and some even took place outside primary schools as children were being dropped off. In one horrifying incident, a Daniel associate was ambushed during morning drop-off, with parents screaming and shielding their kids as bullets flew near the school gates. The victim here was Ross Monahan. He was the same man acquitted in Carroll's case. He took a bullet to the back but miraculously survived. Around the same time, a 28-year-old man linked to the Daniel crew was shot dead while sitting at a red light. He was assassinated as casually as you would order coffee. He was just waiting for the traffic signal to change when killers pulled up and ended his life. This meant now that Jamie Daniel was gone, no one on his side was safe, not even at a routine traffic stop. But perhaps the most savage attack came in spring 2017, just months after Jamie's death. Stephen Bonzo Daniel, who was Jamie's nephew, became the target. One night, Lyons' henchmen spotted Bonzo driving and gave chase at terrifying speeds through Glasgow's north side. The pursuit hit 100 miles per hour as the hunters closed in like wolves. They rammed Bonzo's car, forcing a crash that could have killed him instantly. After that, masked attackers leaped out and hacked at Stephen Daniel with a machete. They were there to butcher him right there in the street. By the time they fled, Bonzo's face was mutilated almost beyond recognition. First responders thought he had been shot in the head. Such was the gore. His nose was hanging off on the left side near his ear. Still, Stephen Bonzo Daniel survived the attempted murder, but his scarred face would forever serve as a walking reminder of just how vicious this feud had become. Over just 5 months following Jamie Daniel's death, 5 separate murder plots were hatched against Daniel family members and allies. It was open season on the Daniel clan, and the Lyons were determined to finish the job they had started. Glasgow authorities scrambled once more to contain the chaos, which was now completely out of control. The violence had grown so extreme and public that even the Scottish government quietly intervened behind the scenes. Special operations were established, surveillance intensified to suffocating levels, and by 2019, a handful of Lyon hitmen were finally arrested and convicted. As 2019 ended, Glasgow found itself right back where it started. It was gripped by fear of the next attack and praying the cycle of revenge might finally burn itself out. The Lyons versus Daniel feud had become the stuff of Scottish criminal legend. Each clan had spilled the other's blood and seen their own families torn apart in return. Even with the original kingpins dead and buried, the feud had taken on a life of its own. It was passed down like some cursed inheritance that nobody could escape. But just when it seemed like things had quieted down, the feud came roaring back in the most brutal way possible. On May 31st, 2025, 2 of the Lyons' most feared men, Ross Monahan and Eddie Lyons Jr., were assassinated in cold blood. It happened outside Monahan's bar in Fuengirola, Spain. The 2 were celebrating after the Champions League final, drinking like kings, totally unaware that their clock was about to run out. A lone gunman came in front of the bar and opened fire. Eddie Jr. took a bullet to the chest and collapsed instantly. He was dead before he hit the ground. Monahan tried to flee back inside, but he was gunned down right in front of screaming customers. He was shot 4 times in his chest and stomach. The hit was ruthless. Spanish police believe the Daniels ordered it, but in Glasgow, everyone is playing dumb. The police denied it. Even members of the Lyons clan claimed it wasn't the Daniels. But nobody really believes that, not in this world. The murders sent a fresh terror through Scotland and its underworld. A double assassination in broad daylight was a declaration of war. Even though no one knows which gang really pulled the trigger yet, most think it's the Daniels, given their long history of feud. As for the Lyons, recently they held a joint funeral in Bishop Briggs for Eddie and Ross. Over 500 people showed up. Among them was a broken Eddie Lyons Sr., who buried his own son and his son's best friend. Who do you think was really behind this double assassination? Share your theories with us in the comments below. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more updates. Goodbye for now.